afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. Got a great program for you today. We're going to have a guest that you may have seen before if you follow us here on Border Report Live. We're going to have Austin Kocher, assistant professor, research professor at Syracuse University. I like to call him the data guy. He's got all the data on immigration arrests. So our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, is going to be speaking with him in just a little bit. But we do want to bring you the headlines that are making news across the border, starting with the latest on the new details on that shooting at an ICE detention facility in Dallas. Now, after our program yesterday, the Department of Homeland Security issued a correction. We now know that one detainee, not two, were killed in the attack. However, those two migrants are in critical condition. No law enforcement officers were injured, but we're also learning more about the alleged shooter who officials say died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Now, officials have not identified him, but a law enforcement official told the Associated Press that he was 29-year-old Joshua John. Now, this is video actually of agents arriving in armored vehicles to a house linked to the suspected shooter in a Dallas suburb. Now, according to the Associated Press, John briefly worked at a Texas-based solar company and in the marijuana industry. The owner of a legal cannabis shop in Washington State, where John once worked, said he used to sleep in his car during that time. Now, at a news conference that just wrapped up not too long ago, officials said they found rounds of ammunition with anti-ICE messaging at the scene. FBI Director Kash Patel said that at the suspected shooter's home, FBI agents have seized electronic devices, handwritten notes, and other evidence from the shooter's home. Patel said one of the notes recovered read, "Hopefully this will give ICE agents real terror to think, is there a sniper with armor-piercing rounds on that roof?" End quote. But Democratic lawmakers are criticizing officials and Republican lawmakers of, quote, trying to control the narrative. One Texas lawmaker said officials are withholding information and won't say immigrants were the target of the attack. Now, there have been recent attacks at ICE facilities that we've told you about. One on July 4th, attackers dressed in black military-style clothing opened fire outside the Prairieland Detention Center in Alvarado, southwest of Dallas. One police officer was shot in the neck. 11 individuals were arrested in that case. And it's the other one is the one we told you about on July 7th that happened about 30 miles away from us at the McAllen International Airport. You may remember my reporting on that as a man with an assault rifle fired dozens of rounds at federal agents as they were leaving a U.S. Border Patrol facility just right there at the corner from the McAllen International Airport. Now, Ryan Lewis Mosqueda injured a police officer, a McAllen Police Department police officer, before authorities were able to shoot and kill him. Now, this is a developing story, and you can look for updates on this story at borderreport.com. Now, I did want to bring in our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, to talk a little bit about that press conference that just wrapped up a short while ago. What did we learn from that, Sandra?
Right, Rudy, it just wrapped up. There were officials with ICE, with the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office. Basically, the big theme was that officials insisted that John intended to do real harm to ICE agents. And as you mentioned earlier, this was based on some of the notes and information that they found from him. He wanted to cause a lot of damage and create a lot of terror. And this was in his own words, according to some of the letters that they found. The shooter said also that he did not plan on surviving. Another thing that was really interesting was that he was spotted at 3 a.m. with a ladder in his truck. And they believe that that is how he got into position. That was just one of the details that came out of today. We'll be sifting through more. And like you said, you can look for more at borderreport.com.
All right. Thank you so much, Sandra. Moving on to our other headline for this Thursday. Officials are investigating the death this week of a 39-year-old Mexican man in ICE custody. Ismael Ayala Uribe was at the Adelanto ICE processing center north of Los Angeles. He was taken to a regional hospital for surgery on an abscess on his buttocks. Hospital staff found him unresponsive and, quote, initiated life-saving measures, but he was declared dead around 2:30 on Monday morning. The cause of death is still under investigation. His family said that he had high blood pressure but was otherwise healthy. Now, Mexico's Foreign Relations Department offered its condolences to the man's family and said that the Mexican consulate in San Bernardino would follow up with authorities at the Immigration Detention Center to ensure thorough investigation to fully clarify this cause of death. Time now to bring in our guest for today's program. We have Assistant Research Professor at Syracuse University, Mr. Austin Kocher, joining us today. Hey, how you doing, sir?
Great. Thanks for having me here.
Sandra?
Yeah, thanks for being with us, Professor Kocher. You are knowledgeable, and you have written recently about some of the deaths in ICE facilities. And so given what just transpired in Dallas, I wanted to jump in. You track these deaths. Recently, you wrote on one of your Substack accounts that the death that we just talked about that happened Monday was actually the 14th death detainee who died since January. Now with the Dallas events, we're up to 15, and we know that one person at least is in critical condition, so there could be more deaths associated with that. What's driving this, and how are you tracking this?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's tragic just how much violence we're seeing in this country right now, both the assault on the detention center and potentially targeting federal agents, as well as the death of immigrants who are being held in civil immigration facilities. The civil violations are not an offense that is punishable by capital punishment. So it's really tragic to see this happen. So I track it because ICE is required to publish information about detainee deaths online. Sometimes it takes a delay, and sometimes what they post online doesn't include some deaths that happen shortly after people are released. So there's some debate about, 14 is how many is officially reported. I would say it's probably closer to maybe 20 or 25 if we included, the numbers that some other people would count. I'll also mention that I'm also working with the Women's Refugee Commission to track the detention and custody of pregnant immigrants in ICE custody. And one of the tragic things that we've learned in the last year about that is that many pregnant women, when they don't receive adequate health care, miscarry those children as well. So if you also count that, the death toll of the number of women who have lost pregnancies in detention also raises that number. So ICE releases data on that. I'm part of some independent projects to help collect data on that. It's certainly tragic. And we're seeing those numbers go up in part because the immigrant detention system has expanded so rapidly in the last 9 months. And alongside with that rapid growth, also there's just a potential for there not to be adequate healthcare services, not really adequate oversight to make sure that those healthcare services, when available, are provided in a timely fashion. Many of the mechanisms for oversight for immigrant detention have gone away. And are not being enforced quite as robustly as they used to. So I think all of this creates an environment where it's expected and somewhat predictable that we would see more deaths in and around ICE detention, unfortunately.
I want to back up. You mentioned this study that you're doing about pregnant women in detention facilities miscarrying. Have you released any of that information? Can you give us any kind of idea? What kind of numbers are we looking at?
We have reports of about 24, I believe, people women who have faced serious complications or miscarriages in custody so far this year, which is what prompted this new project and this new partnership with the Women's Refugee Commission, who have been doing this work for a long time. We haven't released any of the data out of this new project yet. We're really at the data collection phase. But if anyone out there is aware of anyone who is pregnant and has been in ICE custody, they can go to detentionpregnancytracker.com and submit an anonymous report. This is strictly for the purposes of understanding the scope of the problem and figuring out what we can do to make sure that if and when women are detained and if they happen to be pregnant, that they receive adequate health care. And, we certainly want to encourage the agency to follow the policies that it has on the books to do as much as the agency can to release those pregnant women rather than keep them in detention facilities that are typically not typically, as a rule, are not prepared to really provide that kind of care.
That's fascinating, and we look forward to seeing the data and talking to you when those reports come out, and I'm sure you're going to let us know about it. I know that recently 2 Democratic senators from Georgia sent a letter to Homeland Security Secretary Noem and Todd Lyons, the acting ICE director, raising concerns about the number of deaths now we're not talking pregnant women, we're talking people in ICE custody. They said 10 deaths from January to June. That marked the highest number ever since ICE started. I mean, you mentioned overcrowding, lack of transparency, lack of regulation. I mean, are there solutions to what can be done that you're seeing to slow the number of deaths or harm that people in detention are facing?
Certainly. So, the current administration is trying to detain everyone, based on the data that I've looked at fairly indiscriminately in terms of the seriousness level of people's criminal histories and so forth. What that means is just inevitably, if you double the size of any population from the United States and you put them in a facility that is not designed for human beings to live in for prolonged lengths of time, you're going to have people with medical conditions. New medical conditions may emerge in the process. They're under stress. There's many reports of people not really being provided a full nutrition that they need to be in there, which complicates medical factors. As I said, there's insufficient oversight. There's been efforts to prevent senators and representatives to go into those facilities as they are required by law. So I think, simply put, we need the facilities to make sure that they are providing everything that they are required to by law. We need better oversight so we know what's going on. And I know this is controversial, but the more people we put in civil detention and don't release and don't provide some pathway to, the more likely it is that we're going to see more deaths. That's just how that works.
We're speaking with Professor Austin Kocher of Syracuse University. He tracks all kinds of immigration custody data, and we're going to continue this conversation when after a quick break. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to Border Report Live. We are speaking with Professor Austin Kocher, who tracks ICE immigration custody numbers today. Sandra?
Yeah, Professor, a few weeks ago, I reached out to you looking for some numbers, and you were traveling, I know, and you texted me back, kind of pointed me in the right direction. But like a good professor, you did not give me the answer. You made me work for it. And actually, as a journalist, and many of us bug you all the time, I did find the data, and I was so proud of myself. And this is kind of what you do full time. I mean, where does your data come from that you compile to put all this information? Is it accessible to the public? Tell us what sources you use.
The data that I work with comes from the federal government through public records request. The federal government has a variety of databases that includes what most of us would consider to be authoritative data on arrests, detention, deportation, court cases, and so forth. So that's really my main data source. I also work with other data sources like survey data. Sometimes I scrape data from online, social media, comments, things like that. Or I use data that other academics and researchers have put together and published and made available to the public. So those are a lot of the data sources that I work with. And accessibility is kind of an interesting question, Sandra, because, when it comes to public records requests, and I know as a journalist, you care about public, government transparency and using, public records. It's an important tool for reporters, just like academics. But just getting the data itself isn't always enough for something to be transparent, because the data that you get from the federal government doesn't come with a handbook or, customer support or anything like that. Like I get it and I just have to make sense of it. So what I try to do as a professor and as a researcher is I try to turn that into good research. And then I also try to do the second step, which is try to find ways to communicate the research and the data to a broader public, because I'm just a strong believer that, my value is that no matter what your politics are or your education level or where you are, I want you to have access to look at the data for yourself and draw your own conclusions rather than me telling you what to think about it. So what I try to do is take that complicated data and say, look, let me just explain the basics of this and give you some summaries of it so you don't have to do all of the messy stuff yourself. and then you look at it and you tell me what you see, as opposed to me always telling other people what I see. So that's what I try to do.
Well, I don't know if I imagine you in a room with a million computers compiling this, because it causes my laptop to overheat sometimes when I try to find some of this stuff. One of the new sources for immigration is called the Immigration Enforcement Dashboard, and it tracks ICE arrests. It's new. It just started in July. You kind of mentioned it in your Substack. I mean, tell us about this, and it's going to add on features. How important is this going to be in the future?
I think this will be an invaluable source of authoritative data on what's going on with immigration enforcement in our country. This project is only possible because the Deportation Data Project at Berkeley University and David Hausman and his team have been able to obtain large data sets from the federal government on all of these factors that we just mentioned. The data has been used by news outlets across the country, think tanks across the whole political spectrum. Certainly researchers in my field are using this data because they're making all of it fully public and fully transparent to everybody. Now, the challenge is that if you don't have the technical skills or even the capacity, like you said, the computers, if you don't have the computing power to do it, then even having access to the data in the public domain isn't necessarily enough. So what I wanted to do with my team is to say, look, why don't we take this and turn it into a dashboard that anybody can come and look at? We'll make it user-friendly. We'll make it mobile ready. And there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of really detailed stuff in the data that most people are not going to find relevant. So we'll take those things out so it's not confusing. And then we'll try to present it in a way that is completely objective, totally nonpartisan, but that more people can go and look at for themselves. And so far, it seems like it's been a useful resource. So I'm really grateful for the feedback that we've received so far.
So it's the Immigration Enforcement Dashboard. You can find it at enforcementdashboard.com. You can put in a few filters. It goes back to September 2023, but I like to start with January 2025 and work to current data to try to make sense of some of these. Some of the information that is listed show ICE arrests to date since January, 138,068. And arrests were down. So I think, we have a bar graph here slightly. And you can see in June it was 30,390 down to 23,617 in July. So a slight dip. Yet spending for ICE facilities and manpower and increasing assistance to ICE for law enforcement continues to increase, but we see that decrease. So is that why this is important to show the public that, we're making fewer arrests, yet we're spending this money? It's up to, like you said, not taking a political view. It's up to people to make their own decision. But here's the data showing what's actually happening.
That's exactly it. Every administration, Democrat or Republican, it has a political incentive to tell the story that advances their interests and defends their policy decisions and their funding decisions. Those statements and those stories don't always align to the data. And so no matter who's in office, I think the American public deserves access to data that helps them to see, does the data align with what the administration is saying or not? Recently, and by the way, arrests are still down in August and September. The Deportation Data Project, their data has not been updated since July, but we have some other data sources that catch us up to September, and they've stayed lower than June. And part of that is because we aren't into the new fiscal year yet. Part of that is because there's been some litigation about the appropriateness of the kinds of methods that ICE was using back in June. So there is some controversy there. But I think, these numbers always fluctuate. But with the new, a huge funding package of over $150 billion for immigration enforcement, I would anticipate that any recent dip in numbers will probably go back up again. But it's a great point, and you see that the funding influx of funding does not always directly correspond to an increase of arrests in that way.
And just to reiterate, the Deportation Data Project is from UCLA and UC Berkeley. And they're not the ones compiling this dashboard, but you are using this information for this dashboard, right? Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Another thing that recently you wrote about using some of the data that you compile is ankle monitors. I found it fascinating. Actually, although it was a small percentage, the use of ankle monitors increased. And as you and I know, it's, we've seen migrants with them, and Rudy and I've talked about it on the show here. They're cumbersome. People don't like it. They complain it gives them blisters. It's hard to shower. So a lot of people were using SmartLink or wristwatches, devices that were issued. And now it looks like SmartLink decreased a bit and ankle monitors increased. And, what do you make of that?
Sure. So the backstory to that is kind of interesting. The Biden administration, more than any other administration, dramatically expanded immigration surveillance through alternatives to detention. And alternatives to detention is a program that's been around for a long time, but it's a way of monitoring immigrants who are not in detention at the moment. And they piloted and launched this use of a dedicated smartphones to do that kind of tracking, to do biometric check-ins and all of it. Very interesting program. But Republicans viewed it as too light on immigration, basically. They were very critical of the use of smartphones. And so now with Trump back in office, they are slowly tapering off the use of those smartphones and going back to the ankle monitors, which have been criticized, as you've said, for being very punitive. They're sort of embarrassing, or they sort of, there's some public shame around them. They're painful. But they're going back to that model, and I think it's fair to say, even in the Trump administration's own words, they are leaning into more punitive kinds of approaches to immigration. So it fits with their idea and their ideology that immigrants, as much as possible, if they're even being perceived as breaking the law, and just to be clear, not everyone on ankle monitors had broken any immigration laws. You can be in that program and just be an asylum seeker lawfully in the United States, not having actually broken any laws. So, but they still, I think, have an incentive right now to try to make everything as punitive as possible. So I think that's why we're seeing the return to those ankle monitors.
From a cost perspective, will you be able to track how much it costs for a SmartLink versus an ankle monitor? I know that alternatives to detention is a fraction of the cost of actually having someone in detention is like $152 a day, and it's like under $5 a day for ATT. But the various different forms of it, can you track that? Are you looking into that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, and so the SmartLink devices cost less than $1 a day.
Wow.
To run.
Okay.
The GPS ankle monitors are at least 3 times that. And that's just the daily cost. There's new contracts that's going to cost taxpayers even more, because the private contractor is going to have to build another 50, 60, 70,000 ankle monitors to meet the demand that I think the administration would like to see. So it's going to be really massive. I estimated just a few weeks ago that if they moved everyone from SmartLink to ankle monitors right away, given how many people are in detention, the government would go from spending about $220,000 a day to over $500,000 a day.
Wow.
Just on alternatives to detention. And let's just be clear on what the data says on this, no evidence that this improves outcomes. It doesn't improve the rate of
guaranteeing that they'll show up at court. Right.
That's right.
Okay. Wow. You heard it here. Fascinating new information.
We've been speaking with Assistant Research Professor at Syracuse University, Dr. Austin Kocher, about all the latest immigration data now being released and the data that he tracks over there at Syracuse University as well. Thank you so much for joining us again, Professor Kocher. Hopefully we can have you again soon, because we always love to.
I have more questions.
Yeah, we have tons more questions and no time. So we appreciate you being here, sir.
Thank you.
I'll come anytime I'm invited. I love the show.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for watching, but we're going to be right back. So stay with us. We're back in a minute. And welcome back to Border Report Live. South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez here again. Sandra, you've got some new reporting on the connection between green jobs and migrants. I know we just got a little bit over a minute, so tell us what you got.
Working on this story today, the Climate Migration Council has a new report out today that shows that by 2040, 13 million jobs associated with green energy will be needed, and that migrants actually could play a big role in filling those jobs. Now, the study looked at 25 cities in 7 countries, so it's throughout the world. It included like Denver, Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, Rome, Madrid. Really fascinating, but says that migrants can be trained and plugged in, but communities need to make a concerted effort now to fill those future jobs.
Yeah, interesting stuff, especially considering what one of our guests earlier this week from the Cato Institute had to say about the need for more people to come to this country to fill all the jobs that we have available, kind of going hand in hand with what's happening right now. I don't know if you remember what the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said it, saying employment numbers are coming down. So, one of those things, we need those people to kind of backfill in there. All right. Well, thank you so much today, Sandra. And thank you to those of you watching. We appreciate you being here today. My name is Rudy Mideles. She's Sandra Sanchez. You can catch more on her reporting on that report she's working on borderreport.com. We'll see you tomorrow.